Hello everyone, this week is about the rule of law. So today I'm going to explain Chapter 4, Public Management Backbone, the rule of law, and then one article in 2003 written by Cockburn and Schneider, The Quality of Management and Government Performance. In our society, the main key point is that the quality of government, which means their public policy and public decision making based on the democratic procedure. So in other words, public policy in their program should be based on the citizens' needs. So some scholars said there are some variation within democracies to improve their starting points. So there are several different main concepts like separation of powers, veto players, and checks and balances. Among them, checks and balances is the most important factor affecting public policy and decision making because they have some effects of not only imposing structure on public governments and public managers, not only of creating opportunities and sometimes challenges for managers practicing their craft within the confines of those concepts in public sector. So in other words, it implies public bureaucrats and public officials should be politically neutral without any political ties or without any private interest. And next, this is the basic frame underlining our government. You can see there are public agency. Their decision making and policy should be based on citizens' needs. So which means they have some obligation to provide public goods and services to the citizen. Two, of course, they might be related to our communities. But inside the decision making, there are several main actors, legislative bodies and executive office, and of course, public agency. And according to the textbook, they say some rules of law in public management. Basically, there are three separate branches of government, which is clear in our society. And also the author said the meaning of rule of law in our PA field, which means the duly promulgate within principles and policies, so which are the primary basis for the legitimate exercise of administrative authority, and therefore they are protection against arbitrary, capricious, I'm sorry for my pronunciation, and non-transparent acts by public managers. So basically, in the U.S. history, this rule of law brought it up by John Adams. For the Constitution of the Commonwealth of MA, means Massachusetts, to provide a ration for separation of the power, which means John Adams, created this idea about separation of power, and he made like this. The three sectors should be separated. And also in the textbook, they mentioned that some sources of law. Obviously, we in our society constitutional law, which is the highest level, and then statutory law and administrative law and executive orders, and as well as the international law. But the thing is, the law in all these forms above mentioned is often ambiguous and might be changing depending on the environment. So which means in today's uncertain and complex environments, there are different variation across the citizens. So which means the law should be changed depending on the environment. Then of course public managers changing rule and their decision making should be operated in the boundary of their accountability and public values like integrity, morality, effectiveness, and efficiency or responsiveness, something like that. And more specifically, in the context of US history, in 1887, Woodrow Wilson wrote The Study of Administration. I'm sure you may aware of this concept, and I'm sure some of you already took the intro PA, so you may remember this concept. So Wilson wrote The Study of Administration, which said the administrative government is a field of business that should be removed from the hurry and strife or politics. So which means politics and administration should be separated. So if you believe in this dichotomy, there's no problem of accountability within public organization because the administrators don't make political decisions. The dichotomy arguments found intellectually home with the emergency of the scientific management movement, founded by Frederick Taylor. I remember that might be in 20th century, and also it is called sometimes Taylorism. So in this concept, Wilson saw politics as being hurry and strife, whereas administration should be business-like, almost like an assembly-like. So here, public agencies should be responsible to the law and elected representatives of the people and the chief executive and public interest. That's the main concept. And also the last one, the administrator should build relationship with political leaders to get agencies' needs on the agenda. That's the only exception. And also it is necessary to have a relationship because the elected officials are responsible for needs and wants of constituents. So which means administrators operation decision making should based on the citizens' need. And more specifically said, why dichotomy does not and should not exist. Some scholars said it can exist because legislative agency can't write a fully comprehensive law. So there will always be some degree of discretion that is left up to the administrators. So again, shouldn't exist because there's a value in having administrators with expertise are able to make some decisions. So which means it implies there's a distinction between legislative body and administrative ones, right? And also some people said administrators owe their existence to politics, which means public agency is obviously beset with politics condition, right? So these same administrators influence politics by giving advice on policies to legislators and through implementation decisions. In other words, politics and administrators should be separated in decision making, but sometimes in inside the public administrator they should be interrelated to make decisions to meet citizens' needs. And then there's some distinction again, politics versus bureaucracy, which means administration. So basically, politics means how decisions are taken, which is the main concept. On the other hand, bureaucracy means, based on this concept, how policies can be implemented effectively or efficiently. That's the main point. So in the US history in 1970s and 80s, there's a one reform named New Public Management. Also, it can be called NPM, so which is the broad concept bigger than bureaucracy. The President Bill Clinton adopted this concept, so this concept came to US from Britain. So one of their reforms is that agencies should adopt performance-based policies, performance-based contracting, performance-based something in their organization. So main concept is then I'm sure you're already familiar with this concept. One book, Reinventing Government, written by Osborne and Gabler in 1992. He says states should something like steering rather than rowing. So which means at that time such business like administrative movement affect public sector. So in other as a result, privatization, for example, contracting out, is more business like, a decision making have paid great attention after that. And then we need to think about the question how law affects public management. So basically, public sector related to in the legislative branches in legislative agency. So public managers might be related with some relationship with elected legislature, elected executive, the courts of law, institution and convention, something like that. But main concept is that their system should be based on checks and balance like this. Because I already mentioned it before, our society have three separation of power, right? So first one is legislative branch. Second one is executive branch, which is public management, public agency in implementing public policy. And third one is judicial branch. And then we need to think about more specifically the checks, internal checks, holding bureaucracy accountable, responsive, and representative in our society. The first one is we need to think about legislative control. Obviously, they have legislation, budgeting, legislative veto, and oversight as their main duty, and informal contract. Second one is judicial control exists in the public sector. They deal with some concern of procedural fairness rather than responsiveness. And also they deal with money to file a suit. And also the courts sometimes lack expertise, so sometimes they are not designed for monitoring bureaucracy. But the thing is that their position should be separated from against some discretion of executive and legislative branches. And next, there are some traditional control because sometimes, obviously president signed the bill, so they have some power, and the practitioner should be effective and ensuring responsiveness to their citizens, their people. Basically, the main concept underlying presidential control, they have organizational power in federal government and budget power and executive order implemented by president, and also presidential leadership might be involved in this control system. And lastly, we need to think of federalism as a control. Actually, in the PA field, federalism can be intertwined with the decentralization or centralization as a concept. So which means the state, the lower level government should have their discretion to set something under the federal government policy or law. So it means the implementation and enforcement of policy, and in more specifically, state and local government have their own authority to establish alternative value and direct challenges. So here, for example, when you think about No Child Behind Act in 2003, at that time, even though this is made by federal government, by Bush administration, but state had their own authority to decide what subject to test and when subjects should be tested. So again, this is one of the concept of the control in our society. And then what implications are there if the administration is infused with the politics? So I think you can read by yourself. This is just basic concept. And then actually I want to emphasize one theory. Actually, this is institutional theory, relatively new concept in PA field. It's about how external internal environment affect public organization. So there are several theories to representing relationship between environment and public organization, but the main concept according to this theory, even though public organizations are open system, but the thing is in our society, the impact of the environment on public organization is not always competitive or not always efficient. Because in our society, we have some socially shared belief, rules, and procedure, right? So they may affect as a control mechanism. So which means such rules and roles and beliefs and shared something can control public organizations' decision making or their policies. So some scholar makes one word named isomorphisms, which means as time changed, the public organizations and other institutions become similar or identical each other, which means in the end they look all the same. So there are three different isomorphism mechanism in our society. When you look at coercive isomorphism here, the basic source is legal. So for example, when you think about the GPRA in 1993, GPRA means the Government Performance and Results Act. So at that time, I remember Bill Clinton administration adopted PART, which means Parts Performance Assessment Rating Tool. So basically, under the GPRA in 1993, all federal agencies should be required to adopt parts in all their programs. So they need to make some targeting goals, and after that, they should measuring the result, and they should monitor their progress and reporting their progress. So this is the one of the example about the coercive isomorphism under law. And next, I'm sorry, this is another example representing the impact of law in the public sector. So we need to think about this one question. Why do state governments implement pay for performance in their agency? Actually, the pay for performance implies that the main concept is that linking individual public employees' individual performance with financial reward system. So this is also called merit pay system. In the US history, among state governments in 1968, Florida first adopted this pay for performance system in their state agency. And since the Florida adopted this one in 1990s, more than 23 state governments followed the Florida, so which means they began to adopt this pay for performance system in their state agency. And actually, originally this pay for performance is from private sector. So isomorphism, as isomorphism implies, the Florida adopted this system, which means the copied such successful private sector system in their agency. And also in 1978, in federal government, they also adopted this system. So which is also, we can say, isomorphism in the public sector, right? So basically here, since the Florida adopted this one, Alabama, Mississippi and other state governments followed the rule, and Arizona, California, Oregon followed, and New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts in eastern area, they also adopted this system. So finally, we need to think about the impact of law in our society. Basically, I already mentioned that our society is democratic society. So democratic government depending citizens remain in their control because citizens the main principle. So public bureaucrats and public officials must be held responsible to their performance. So public employee gave up some constitutional right to be public servants, but also maintain due process which ensure fairness, equity, which is the public value, to be protected in the public workplace regarding employment status. So we live in a democracy where politics are determined by the people through political means, usually voting, referendum, and also they can some voice through interest group or iron triangle in some way, and through public administration those policies must be implemented. And next, in terms of the logic of governance in the textbook, author mentioned that the meaning of governance is that the regimes of law, rule, and judicial decision and administrative practices that constrain prescribe, and enable the provision of publicly supported goods and services through formal and informal relations with agents in the public and private sector, which is the long definition. So basically, when you look at the figure 4.1, there's some dynamic process representing hierarchical interrelationship in the public sector. So here, so basic power is citizen preference and interest, and that should be reflected to public choice, like here, to the three different branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial branch. And then there might be public choice should be reflected in the structure of formal authority, and then they should be going through discretional management, organization, and administration in public agency, and then they should provide services and public goods to their citizens, and then there's something performance we can see, right? And then which called the outcome, output, and measure the consequences of the public policy or decision making of public organization, and then finally, like performance reporting, performance measurement concept, citizens and clients and other stakeholders can assess their performance. And next, based on the previous performance and previous data and feedback, also that can be applied to the first step again, citizen preference and interest. So this is actually one article I obtained from this table from the Hill and Lin's 2004 article. There are one table representing relationship between public management and governance. So they mentioned that how does governance affect performance, and how does public management influence governance. So here, independent variable, which means in statistical way, outcome. There are several different outcomes like this: citizen preference and interest, public choice, structure of formal authority, and discretional management, organization and administration. And also there's primary works and core technologies, and consequences, outcome, output, result, very visual work, and stakeholders assessment of public performance. For example, citizen satisfaction or compliance about their public service and delivery. So you can see here, these are about the governance indicator. And then depending on the public management, depending on the public employee manage their program, we can see several different governance factors, performance factors may be different. And here, when you look at the types of independent variable, which means the cause, so that might be related to the public management capacity. So there are three different concepts, sub-concepts. First one is administrative structure, management tool, maybe strategies, here strategies. So these three things are composed of representing for public management. And also here again, the government. And next, one article written by Cockburn and Schneider in 2003, they mentioned that some basic concept like this. Woodrow Wilson's, I already mentioned that earlier. He said this concept, business of government's more business-like. So which means he again emphasized the distinguish between politics and administration. And then again, 1970s and 80s, there's some business-like administration reform came to the U.S. based focusing on the government performance improvement, and also you need to think about that the how management affect public making and performance, and then how governments and government program and services can be improved. Of course, to improve the value of place where citizens live and work in our society. So which means ultimately the state of government policy and their decision making should be in the boundary of citizens' eyes. That's the main concept. So that's why the author highlighted the importance of state management. So which means that technically the distance between government and public sector and citizens, in state government is much closer compared to the federal level, right? So we need to think about state level management. One concept to improve the quality of management. So here, government performance, the author mentioned that there's a positive relationship between state government managerial capacity and the government performance. Here, this article, the government performance was measured by state policy priority and state policy commitments. So based on the previous study, the author tried to find some relationship between capacity and performance, which means they need to find some evidence to confirm some normative assumption that better management matters to better performance. So the author mentioned that in terms of the government management capacity, there's input. So lastly, we can see some output and outcome, or sometimes government performance, but we don't know the between these two things. So it's called black box. So which is obviously government management capacity. So in this article, the author mentioned that the government management capacity basically this concept: human capital, physical capital, information capital. This is three things are intertwined with this capacity. So state's policy choice, again, public state officials allocation decisions, which money should be A, X, or should be B, or how the money should be A activity instead of B, something like that. So state's policy choice, decision making, can be measured by spending, sometimes the money, right? So when you look at the table 1, so this is about the influence on state policy priorities, and you can see there are some plus and minus coefficient, but when you look at the positive coefficient, you can interpret like this. Positive coefficient indicate greater spending on a particular restrict benefit, and make the organization indicates greater spending on more collective benefits. And again, the author used in this piece a look at its state expenditure on programs, so that are more collective nature versus programs that are particularistic in nature. So a particularistic benefit is one that affects a particular segment of the publication. So we think about payments for disability as being a particularistic better payments for pensions, retirement benefits, or social security, something like that. So we can think that has been a particularistic benefits because then the benefits are given to a specific segment of society, for example, retired people, something like that. So the decision between particular program and political program based on the depending and government management society, capacity, and also again the decision making of public policy, especially the program is based on the citizens' needs. And again, but the thing is, main concept underlining this article, no one knows which program can be implemented in our society, which means that, of course, we need to think about government management capacity should be improved first. But the thing is, it's the final decision always based on politics. So in conclusion, in the society legislative branches, Congress is there to ensure that actions of the public managers, that is the public bureaucracy, should be in accordance with law, and from time to time the courts always become involved or sometimes may constrain the action of public managers or public director to do certain things to bring them back into conformity with all or to ensure that their actions are legal in our society. That's the main concept, the thing. And I already mentioned that in the announcement, we don't have any discussion question this week, so I like you to focus on your first reaction paper, which should be based on APA style. You can find the APA guideline under the course documents on Blackboard, and that due is next Thursday. Thank you.